Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
December 7th, 1941. A date which will live in infamy. These are the words of Franklin D. Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States. The United States was forced into a war in which the United States declared to be neutral. But due to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States was plunged into World War. But due to the enemies on the Axis powers, the United States would be forced to fight on two different fronts of the war. The United States was forced to adopt the island hopping strategy because of the geography and multiple islands of the Pacific. There were many significant battles that took place in the Pacific during World War II. Battles like Saipan and in Leyte. But one of the most important is the Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway was important because it put Japan on the defensive for the rest of the war. During the Battle of Midway, the United States lost to Yorktown, the destroyer USS Hammond, 145 aircraft and suffered 307 casualties. Even though, in the end, it was a costly victory at Midway, it paved the way for island hopping in the Pacific, all the way to the Philippines and the campaign of the Philippines.
We picked them up at about 35 or 50 miles coming in, and I stationed myself up on the signal bridge with a 35 millimeter motion picture camera to film the battle. This is the 5-inch guns firing at the dive bombers coming in. That's a 6-inch telephoto lens. Now here comes a dive bomber. Now look at the anti-aircraft fire. They're really concentrating on that one. Now he's coming back around to dive. Very few people were on the flight deck, only the gun crews. No kibitzing or observers were up there. You were working. I was probably the only one unarmed on the flight deck. You can see the one that went down the stack and put out the boilers, and they're still smoking and burning. And I came down off the signal bridge where I'd been positioned, got a still camera, and started taking pictures of damage on the flight deck. And this is just one of the pictures. It's one of the most famous pictures because in one view you get the full concept of the battle damage and the activity and what's going on and the condition of the ship, basically. This is the 1.1 or multiple gun mounts. See, that's the gun and the loader's there. See, that's the pointer or trainer, and these are the gun magazines right in here. Wow. These are the dead people and their helmets and stuff. That wasn't shown in the Telenews Theater in San Francisco. None of this. That's the first time I've seen this. I was on the signal bridge filming the dive bombers and their activities. And then the two torpedo planes came, and they struck a port side midship just below the water line.
The Battle of Bataan. Bataan was a city which was supposed to be protected by the United States from the Japanese invasion. The defense was led by General Douglas MacArthur.
Five-star General Douglas MacArthur served the U.S. in 2 world wars and Korea. When he retired, some people thought he was a great war hero. Others, including a president of the United States, thought he was a lunatic. MacArthur's life was intertwined with the Army. He was literally born on an Army base where his father served as a distinguished general.
MacArthur was educated at West Point. From there, he served his country in almost every military conflict for the next 40 years.
In 1941, when MacArthur was stationed in the Philippines, he was appointed commander of U.S. forces in the Far East. When the Japanese attacked later that year, he coordinated a feeble and unsuccessful defense of the Philippine Islands.
On April 9, 1942, the Philippines fell to Japan. On the express order of President Roosevelt, MacArthur, along with his family and a select group of advisors, retreated to Australia, leaving 70,000 men behind.
Before fleeing the Philippines, MacArthur proclaimed, "I shall return." Well, MacArthur did return 2 years later, after thousands of American military and civilian personnel suffered under the brutality of the Japanese occupation of the Philippines.
MacArthur liberated the Philippines and oversaw the surrender of the Japanese on September 2, 1945. He was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Powers and remained in occupied Japan until 1950, when conflict broke out with Korea.
The United States has 79,500 men defending the city, while the Japanese had 75,000 men to besiege the city. The defense of Bataan mainly failed due to the lack of supplies to the main battle points of the peninsula. These were largely unsuccessful, as only 3 ships were able to run the Japanese blockade, while submarines and aircraft lacked the carrying capacity to bring the needed quantities of supplies. After 2 days of fighting on Bataan, American and Filipino forces sustained around 10,000 killed and 20,000 wounded, while the Japanese sustained approximately 7,000 killed and 12,000 wounded. In addition to the casualties, U.S. FIP lost 12,000 American and 63,000 Filipino soldiers as prisoners.
After the Battle of Bataan, Filipino and American troops surrendered on April 1942. They were forced to march. The Japanese treated the POWs with savage brutality. Around 70,000 men began the trek to the north, but only 54,000 arrived or just escaped. Approximately 600 of those who perished were American, between 5,000 to 10,000 were Filipino. After arriving at San Fernando, the troops were put into small railroad cars with no room to sit down. They received no water, no food, and the heat from the tropical sun was relentless. They came to the end of the road, suffering from every disease. They were dirty, pale, and lifeless.
On the 19th and 20th, the ships arrived in Lingayen Bay, so we were being invaded. But now we're standing out there about 15 or 20 hours, and we looked at each other and we said, you know, we're at war. That was really touched me. And I had problems coming from a Christian family of even thinking about killing anybody. And I thought, boy, this is going to be tough, because even though we're ordnance, we probably would be faced with that. And when we were told there was close to 100,000, they estimated 100,000 troops, Japanese troops, that it would be, we would have a rough time. I was carrying a BAR, and I was trying to find some of my men to get them around them up and so forth, and take them, get them out of there. And a Jap jumped out of the bushes and lunged at me with his bayonet. His bayonet caught mine, where the strap, the shoulder strap of the BAR, and the latch to the stock. They hit that little clip, and with the force that he had, pulled it out of my hand. And he's right by the side of me. So I grabbed him and pulled him to me, and I took my hunting knife, and I stuck it in him, and stuck it all the way through him, and a little bit into me. And in other words, and I didn't know, and it went evidently right below his rib cage, but anyway, and that was a hunting knife with a pretty good sized blade. And so I thought, my best thought was, I don't know whether I killed him or not, so I'll just drag him over here to the bluff and throw him off the bluff. And the way I threw him off, it was about 500 foot, so I drug him over and threw him off that bluff. We would hear Tokyo Rose telling us no reinforcements were on the way. And we would hear the Voice of America station at Corregidor